Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished and respected author from Mumbai, India, Rochelle Potkar. Rochelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh.
Rochelle is a poet, she's an author, and she's a screenwriter. Her debut novel, The DaCosta Family, is releasing in April. It's a story of a family or caper, black comedy, followed by the fabric goddesses. She has also won several fellowships and grants. So, Rochelle, my first question for you: what sparked your love for storytelling? Did it begin with poetry, prose, or a moment from your childhood?
So Ashutosh, I think the first time any any storytelling sparked in me was because I was a hidden gossiper,
Hmm.
and when I was a child, I would watch my family. It was a big joint Goan Catholic family, and there were a lot of oddballs, not only there but in the community that I lived in, which was cosmopolitan. It had people from all walks of life, and it was in the 90s. So we were pre-lib, post-lib kind of phase wherein we had a simpler life and you could watch people more because we were not hung on to our technology. We didn't have even a computer or a landline sometimes, so we were more into people reading their faces. So I think my initial curiosity came from watching people and my own relatives, family, neighbors. And I didn't think this curiosity was anything different than anyone else's curiosity. I didn't think this was going to be my profession, but I think the first inklings of story started from there. And then when I moved on to Bombay, because I lived in Kalyan, bred and brought up in Kalyan, but when I moved to Bombay, the city being such a maximum city with so many characters, so many more people that come from all over the world and India became my big palette of curiosity. So
Fascinating.
I think the stories all came from there.
Fascinating. Fascinating. And Rochelle, you've been mentored by some incredible names across continents. What's the most unforgettable advice you have received as an author?
So of course, every mentor, every teacher who comes to you tells you things for that specific time point in your life and which you need. But I think the one like macro, non-specific uh, advice I received was very simple, but it stuck because that's what happens with the brain.
Hmm.
We come across a traffic of information every day. What sticks? And this was by Peter Nazareth, who was a professor at the University of Iowa, and he said something very simple. He said, keep on keeping on.
Hmm.
And though it's very simple, such a simple thing, I realized that keep on keeping on reflects resilience. It
Hmm.
reflects the fact that if you have a setback, if you fall down, how
Hmm.
fast do you rise?
Hmm.
Or what do you do on days when you don't hear anything back from the world in terms of your submissions of creative writing? What
Hmm.
do you do when the markets are lull? What do you do anywhere where there's where things are not working as fast as you want them to? Keep
Hmm.
on keeping on seemed to be a mantra that I use during COVID. I use it during COVID times, which are not COVID, but the pandemics of
Yeah.
life. I
Hmm.
use them time and every time, and I realize that that's one advice that was very macro for the entire journey. All other advice that I received from mentors and teachers were things that were specific to certain projects.
Interesting. What a powerful phrase, isn't it? Keep on keeping on. It probably can resonate with every stage of everyone's life, almost every day. Fascinating. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Rochelle, balancing poetry, fiction, and screenwriting sounds just quite amazing. How do you decide which form a story wants to take?
Mhm. So, Ashutosh, it works like this, that it's almost like the human form. The soul decides whether it wants to be a plant, an
Hmm.
animal, a
Hmm.
man, a woman. The
Correct.
story idea will always come with like a data packet. It comes deciding whether it wants to be a chotu but very potent haiku.
Yeah.
Does it want to be a prose epiphany of a narrative, lyrical like a haibun? Does it want to be a short story told in 2000 to 5000 words? Does it want to be a very long epic? like or a screenplay with a very cinematic visual drama. So
Mm,
the story always comes with its DNA, it comes with its data packet. And I think of this that an idea, a story idea is like a seed that holds the map of the tree.
mm,
So every seed always holds the map of the tree. So whether it's a small tree or a large tree, the story will immediately, instinctively tell you. As
mm,
a storyteller or an idea receiver, what I need to do alone is listen. And
mm.
this listening is very instinctive, it's very ethereal, and it's a listening that's beyond the acoustic listening, the
Correct.
oral listening. And if you listen correctly, you will never get that in a different way. Having said that, I must say, Ashutosh, that sometimes story ideas come in a thematic spectrum. So the same theme could come as a haiku and as a screenplay, as
Mm.
a novel and as a short story. And you just need to know how long, how potent does this idea get.
How interesting. Rochelle, you've also been honored with a Doctor of Literature or a DLit in 2024. What does this milestone mean to you after so many years of working as a writer?
Although we keep grappling between external validation and inner validation,
Mm,
sometimes you want none of them because you feel, why do I need to prove anything more to myself or the world?
correct.
Why do we need to have the gravity or the pressures of those? But having said that, it was a great honor to receive this doctorate because it came from the ex-president, that is Ramnath Kovind sir, and it on the great stage of Mathura University amidst all other celebrated people. And it was recommended. My candidature was recommended by Carol Andrade and the artist Udairaj Gadnis. So I considered this a great honor because it kind of was a redeeming moment for me that sometimes as an artist you can be invisible in the world
Mm,
because art is not as essential as other commodities of necessity. Art is a luxury still, and it's only after you have enough of disposable income would you think of going to poetry or films or the theater. But you first, you suffice your basic necessities of whatever they might be. So
correct.
art is always so inessential that when so you may never get that um, amount of validation from outside or the praise or the the pats on the back when you need them. And of course that builds resilience, inner resilience for artists because
Right.
we are used to a very silent environment. So when these things happen they kind of redeem all the journey that you're
Mm,
undertaking.
mm. How amazing. And congratulations on this
Thank you.
honor. Uh, Rochelle, your work spans poetry, prose, and screenplay. And a few minutes back, you were telling me about, the story is always inside the seed, and then the seed decides whether it wants to be a tree or a small rose or so whatever. Where do you usually find the first flicker of an idea? And I know you live in the maximum city, so there are enough ideas all over the place.
Yes, yes. So I think when I look at other writers, my peers, and when we discuss, because it's so surprising, Ashutosh, that ideas or stories come in different ways to different people. So for some, it might be that the character they start with an interesting character and they follow the
Mm,
character, the scent of the character. Sometimes it could be an event. So this has happened to me, but I think my basic response to story ideation comes from the thematic question.
mm,
So it's not only an interesting character, it's not only a very like eyebrow raising event, but it's the thematic question of what if this and this happened. So it's the alchemy of two questions. So I think that it's very intellectual rather than it being creative or people based first. And then, of course, as soon as the what if opens up a universe of exploration, comes the story world. Then you have characters in that, and then immediately events populate because as a storyteller, I think like any human being, but more as a storyteller, you keep your antennae always open,
mm.
your eyes, you may have
Yeah,
100 eyes actually looking at this, looking at that, and you never know what alchemy is fitting together for the thematic
right.
question of what if this happened.
Correct.
And that's how I start the exploration, and I take it to the end. I'm one person who I don't give up if a story stops speaking to me. I'll just keep it away, and it's like a friend. I'll say I'll come to you some other day.
mm,
And
mm,
some other day when the story calls me, or my brain says, "Ki, you know what, I'm thinking of the visuals of that story. Go back to it now. I think something's ready there." And I'll go back and I'll continue the tale.
mm,
So it never stops. It's like friends, you never lose connection even if you take a big gap.
mm. That is true. And, I can completely empathize or understand what you're saying because I know I write a lot. And, you know, sometimes if I have an idea, I write on one page and make a folder on my computer and leave it. And it could be lying there for
Yes,
several years before I
yes.
pick it up again. Thank you.
Yes,
That's
and I think that idea is waiting for your evolution, right? I
absolutely,
mean, I think the story is sometimes a mentor that prescribes its syllabus to you.
absolutely. Very well said.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I have often wondered is that how can you juggle the quiet introspection of poetry, and poetry is something I've never been able to write, with the high energy drama of a screenplay.
Mhm. So, actually, poetry has a lot of inner drama.
Hmm,
Okay, because it's not only about nature and birds and bees. It can have a lot of protest,
hmm,
rebel,
hmm,
revolution inside it. Some of the most rebellious, revolutionary pieces were poetry.
hmm.
Our national anthems are
Yeah,
poetry.
absolutely.
So I feel that the poem has a lot of inner drama that is like a galaxy that's captured on a page.
Hmm,
But of course, it's internalized as is not as externalized as the drama that you see in a screenplay. So I
hmm,
think one common element of both these forms are the visuality,
hmm,
not necessarily the internalization or externalization of drama, but the visuality. And I think that's something that is a common point between poetry, haiku, haibun, even short stories, how much of imagery you use,
hmm,
and screenplay, which is an image heavy technical document. I call it an art form, but many people still look at it as a very technical document of how to get the scene design done.
hmm,
So I feel the visuality is something that runs through, but also the visuality is something that connects with us as today's humanity that watches so much of visual scrolling. We are
hmm,
becoming very visual people,
hmm,
and the more and more you can convert your words, concepts, and thoughts to images, they stick not only for you, the teller, but also for you, the receiver.
hmm,
So it scores higher, and I, especially when I teach. Haibun and poetry workshops, I always tell my participants that convert your concept to
hmm.
imagery. Can
Yeah,
I see it? Because
yeah.
if I can see it, I will never forget it.
Hmm.
So that's
Very
how
good.
yeah,
Very interesting.
traverse forms.
My next four questions, Rochelle, are about some of the work you have, some of your books. In 4 degrees of separation, how did you decide which emotions deserved their own spotlight?
Mhm. Ashutosh, when you write a screenplay
Mm,
or a novel or a short story, you can outline it, or even non-fiction is thoroughly outlined. But when you write poetry or poetry books, at least in my experience and my peers' experiences, we can't outline a poetry book most of the times. Of course, some do say that we are going to write on global climate change and everything is on that one theme. But generally, we don't outline neither the poetry book, neither the poem.
mm,
So what happens with poetry is you collate what happened in a serendipitous way as you move through life. So every book is always a snapshot,
mm.
or it captures that phase of a poet's life that they were obsessed with, what disturbed them and amused them.
Right.
So you write because it's a serendipitous. You cannot plan that I'm going to write a poem.
Mm,
The poem attacks you. It
mm,
comes like a lightning bolt. Sometimes I call it a sneeze or a cough. You cannot you cannot unplan it.
mm,
It happens. Sometimes poems have disturbed me at 3 a.m. in the morning or
mm,
5 a.m. when I have to wake up. I would love to have a dream recorder. I wish there's a dream recorder invented for poets,
mm,
because that dream recorder will record the first lyrical line. Because
mm.
if you forget that line, you can't say, "Oh, I'm going to write this tomorrow." You can do that for a story and for other, for novels. You can't do that for a poem. You have to wake up and capture the line, and it's in one exhalation that the whole poem comes out. Of course, you can edit, chisel it the next day, but
Mm, mm.
you can't write it piecemeal, stanza by stanza. So as serendipitous is the art of writing poetry, that serendipitous is a way of collating a poetry book. So a poetry book is always collated, it's never outlined. Then what happens is you decide now the only thing you have in control is how can I section it in a way that makes some sense to the reader.
Hmm.
So when I tried to section my book, whether it was 4 degrees of separation or coins and rivers, what
Hmm.
I did is only I looked at, okay, this theme is more personal and private. This is more social. This is more world affairs and politics.
Hmm.
This is philosophical and beyond life and death. So I would section it as broader, almost like concentric ripples moving outward
Hmm.
from, as I call it, the navel gazing to the
Yeah.
stargazing.
Hmm.
That's all that I can section it.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
You know, you're again so right about how you actually assemble uh, a work of, several works of poetry into a book. And that's so well put. Thank you. In your book, Paper Asylum, which was shortlisted for a major prize, what's the riskiest thing you explored?
So there's the difference between poetry and the other art forms of story.
Mm.
In poetry, most of the times you're confessional, and because you're confessional, it becomes very, very vulnerable as an art form, because most of the times the narrator is the narrator I, and only sometimes you would take they, she, and them, but mostly, unlike stories or screenplays where you can always have alter egos that are your characters, they are your human shields. You could always say, no, 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 that person was murderous, I'm a saint. But you can't do that in poetry. It's very confessional most of the times. You are speaking to, you're whispering back to the universe actually. So it's a dialogue or a trilogue. So what happens with that is the vulnerabilities are very high. So Paper Asylum, because it was a book of haibun, that is the Japanese prose poetry form of lyrical verse.
Mhm.
So, because of that, and it's a narrative around an epiphany, most of my epiphanies are personal
Mm.
and they come from a very personal space. So, A Paper Asylum became a very confessional, intimate book.
Mm.
And even though it may have looked at other themes, but most of the themes were from around me, and it was very um, I think it was very, very confessional. And uh, I don't know. I think that was the riskiest thing to put yourself out there with the epiphanies, because I prefer stories, where I can hide behind characters and say, that's not really me, or
Yeah.
that's not really me, or the good one is me, not the
Correct.
bad one.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
yeah,
Correct. Well said.
yeah,
The next one is on Bombay hangover or
yes.
hangovers. It
Yes.
captures a large part of Mumbai's soul.
Mhm.
And I've lived in Mumbai for a few years. What's one corner of the city that keeps sneaking back into your stories?
So, I'll say this in a different way. That, of course, this is a maximum city of sorts, and there are so many things that you can look at and write about. Uh, I'll I remembered a Kolatkar poem which was called Traffic Lights. And in Traffic Lights, Kolatkar does this very interesting deception
Hmm.
that for the first part of the poem, he tells you about the powerful, faceless Mercedes presidents that are passing by. And maybe he means to Mantralay. I'm assuming it's Bombay.
Hmm.
And he's talking about all the rock drills and the drum and everything going by. But he's telling you they're nameless, faceless, he can't see them. And in the middle of the poem, he pivots to traffic lights and tells you, "Okay, hey, actually, I'm talking of the traffic lights and
Hmm.
telling you how much in love they are with each other. And they
Hmm.
are separated by a street. And
Hmm.
with the cold passion of rubies, they are blinking at each other. I'm telling you not about the faceless president, but about the traffic lights
Oh,
in love."
interesting. Yeah.
And suddenly you start seeing that life and city life, or even village life, is not in the extraordinary that we think or we
Correct.
prescribe or
Hmm.
subscribe to,
Hmm.
but in the ordinary things. And
Hmm.
so once you look at ordinary things, you start curating ordinary people who turn out extraordinary, and you start looking at ordinary events that actually are never ordinary. And so when I was writing and writing Bombay Hangovers, my characters come from every station almost. From they could come from town to further up the central line of the railway line.
Hmm.
They could come from every stop. They could come from every class of society, every religion, or and at the same time, they seem so ordinary when the story begins, and they have so much of magic in their ordinary lives that once you start entering their worlds, like for example, Mrs. K. D'Souza lives in Mahim, and she is missing her elder son who just one day walked away and never came back. So
Mm.
while she's waiting for him, there is a vacuum in her life
Mm.
because wait is a big vacuum,
Mm.
and she's looking after her younger son who
Mm.
is autistic.
Mm.
And while she's in that place of waiting in that Mahim house,
Mm.
it's the noise of the city, the clockwork noise of the city that becomes her friend.
Mm.
So the factory siren, or the way the airplane flies at this time, or some other doorbell, some
Yeah.
pressure cooker.
Mm.
These are the ambient sounds of her life.
Wow.
And so the city communicates with her by her dependence on the noise
Mm.
around it. And
Mm.
it fills her life in a different way.
Correct.
And this may seem even invisible actually when we first think of it. But if we look at our own soundscapes where we live, we
Mm.
will realize we are used to certain sounds.
Mm.
We hinge and anchor into a place based on certain sounds. And
Mm.
so, Bombay as a theme, Bombay as a character gives way to so many ways of telling stories for,
Right.
its people and characters. And the book is also coming out in Hindi, by the way, very
Oh,
shortly.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So I'm watching the clock and I wanted to ask you a few more questions, but I thought I'll also ask you about your debut novel, The DaCosta
Mhm.
Family, which is scheduled for release in April. I'm not sure if you are at liberty to talk about it, but if you are, tell
I
me a
am,
little
I
bit
am.
about the
Yeah.
book.
Okay. So the book is actually a madcap family caper comedy, and it's black comedy. And it's, I think, all the Goan people I witnessed in my childhood. And I thought, I need to get them out of my system
Hmm.
because I need new stories to come by.
Yeah,
And you want to
yeah,
be empty as a
yeah.
vessel. So this is actually, between like a kind of a tug of war between the landlords who are greedy and the tenants who are, half-assed, if I can say. And there is some little crime that takes place, and there is our Inspector Gaitonde who's trying to crack through all this.
Hmm.
And through this hilarity, I'm actually telling you a tale which is very serious, maybe about greed, about the games people play, or the way they like tug on each other's honesties and vulnerabilities. But I'm telling you that in a very tongue-in-cheek way because as a storyteller, I realized that out of all the Navarasas, I also like the Hasya Rasa.
Hmm.
So there should be a time when I just am able to chuckle. So I have chuckled through this book in a very silent way as I
Hmm.
wrote it.
Yeah.
I hope the reader will at least chuckle once or
Hmm.
twice.
Hmm. Thank you. Well, maybe I'll reach out to you once your book is released and have another conversation only on that book.
Sure, sure,
So
sure.
I have time for two more questions, Rochelle.
Yes.
My next question is that your work has been translated into Arabic, Hungarian, and you just said Hindi and other languages. What's the best reaction you've got from a reader from outside India?
So, there is this place called Macedonia, and it has this very big Struga festival, which is like poets reading in the boat on the river and all that. I've not been to the festival yet, but we had a translation done by a common friend um, for a few of us poets,
Hmm.
and I might have sent some of my poems, some of my best poems, perhaps, and in a very random way, like once you send it, you celebrate its publication and you move on. But there was a very interesting, simple, informal WhatsApp that my translator sent back saying the Macedonian readers have said that these are the most powerful, unforgettable poems they have read in translation. And I am not competitive, but I felt very happy that
Hmm.
somewhere in some corner of the world, in translation, somebody found my poems powerful enough to remember
Hmm.
them and come back and tell me about it.
Hmm.
So these are heartening things that happen.
Absolutely. Fascinating. And my last question for you, Rochelle. With two upcoming novels and a global footprint, where do you dream your writing will take you next?
I think my writing will take me back to India because even though I'm like an internationally published Indian English poet writer,
Hmm.
I feel that I don't want to miss out on telling tales to my fellow Indians because sometimes we, as English writers, tend to look international and
Yeah.
want to talk to the international markets, which is not wrong. But
Mm.
I feel I don't want to lose sight of the Indian reader because they will understand all the nuances of what I'm trying to talk
Mm.
more than anybody else will. So first, it's them, and I feel so. I want to actually look at home,
Mm.
and also because the linguistic pitch. I must mention something about the linguistic pitch. Being a poet, we can write in such abstract language
Mm.
with linguistic embellishments that you can be shoulder to shoulder with an Irish poet with
Mm.
their language,
Yeah.
their English, because there are so many Englishes in the world.
Mm.
But when you come to screenwriting, you write very Spartan and simple visual English.
Mm.
You don't need any embellishment. In fact, not one extra prosy or poetic word will work because you can't expect, say, a spot boy or a light person to understand that. So you want to keep it simple. And the novel is somewhere that the linguistic pitch is between the screenplay and the poetry, which is something that is now, as I speak, that kind of a language, which gangplanks, which is relatable, which is not so esoteric that you need the dictionary or the thesaurus.
Mm.
Because I want my stories to be so transparent in the robes that they wear of language. I don't want language to interfere with the telling of the story. So I realized that the Indian reader is at that level wherein they don't go for this esoteric, poetic stuff.
Yeah.
They don't want it as simple or Spartan as the screenplay language, but something like this, where you just tell stories and it just connects. So I
Fascinating.
think I want that
Amazing.
I'm going there.
And more power to you on that one. But on that
Thank
note, Rochelle, I just want to say thank you so much for this absolutely incredible conversation. What a
thank you.
pleasure
Thank you
it
so
has been to
much.
talk to you about your books, about this absolutely amazing mantra, and I'm going to repeat it again, which is keep on keeping on. Thank you for talking to me about some of your deepest thoughts, and some of your poems, your books that you spoke about, and of course the DaCosta family. It was such a pleasure speaking to another fellow author like you, who's obviously much recognized all over the world, and I look forward to seeing much more success from you. Thank you
Thank you,
again.
Ashutosh. Thank you, Ashutosh, for this very warm conversation and such wonderful questions. Thank you so much. More power to you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.